This is going to be exceedingly difficult for several reasons. I'm still partially ill and a little bit tired. And also many of you folks are new. And the class has been going on for 4 years.
We're late.
And it started out, the whole idea is to take myths as a basis for looking into modern mysticism. And in that regard, the myths are in many ways taken literal. And in many ways taken to be just the opposite of literal. And so the class has been going on. It started out with a sub-series about creation myths. Native American, Indian, Tibetan, Bible stories, and such. And then there was a sub-series that was on myths that are used by the mystery schools, or that were used by the mystery schools, including Isis and Osiris, Demeter and Persephone, Dionysus, and eventually Orpheus. And then we spent an entire year on another sub-series. That year we met every week, and it was on mysteries of heroes and heroines, and we discussed spiritual initiation from a number of points of view. Now, what this is the second year of a sub-series, which is probably going to run 3 years. And it is on myths that indicate hierarchy. And the first semester last year we talked about Hindu myths and hierarchy in Hindu mythology, which wasn't very much. And then we spent the second semester on Egyptian mythology, which has a lot of hierarchy in it. And then all of this year we've been discussing hierarchy in Greek mythology. And we started out with the Pelagian concept of the birth of everything and the hierarchy in it. And that took all of an hour and a half, and we were done within. Then we took about 4 or 5 weeks on Orphic cosmogony, taking a lot from a book called Theology of Plato by Proclus, and which was very, very beautiful. Now we are in Olympic cosmogony, and we're following the descent of everything primarily through Gaia, and we're looking at different principles of hierarchy along the way. And we have talked about, this is a rather profane course, and tonight will probably, on my part, be the most profane part of it. We talked about the incestuous relationship of Gaia with her own firstborn, Uranus, and we talked about incest myths and parental incest and homosexuality and a whole bunch of other things that had to do with Uranus. And then we talked about the various offspring from that union, mostly the Cyclops and the Giants, and then eventually we got to the Titans, and last week we discussed the castration of Uranus and what that represented in creative consciousness. This week we're going to be talking about the dethronement of Uranus by all of the castration of Uranus was done by Kronos, and all of the beings that are represented by the generation of Uranus, Auriel, and Pontos were overthrown by the Titans. And this week, Kronos gets overthrown by Zeus and the gods. And it's now you don't know what you're in for, because I've developed a rather idiosyncratic personality over the years, in that I was a social misfit until I discovered mysticism, and I loved everyone as much as I could, but I found out I was still a social misfit. I found out I had a lot of remedial socializing to do, or socialization to do, and I found out that involved fighting, and I abhor fighting. And so what happened is that every time I would become associated with people or groups or whatever, even friends, and things would come to a struggle, I wouldn't fight. I'd go off and do something else, which made me more and more idiosyncratic and not fitting in with anyone. And so all of this turns out to be a little strange. We were reading from Hesiod last time. We ended up reading the poetic story, or the version from Hesiod's poetry, of the castration of Uranus all the way to the birth of Aphrodite and the Erinyes and the Mele, who were born out of the blood and testicles of Uranus. And when we read from there, we came into an embarrassment, because all along we had been taking the mainstream story of the giants and the Cyclops being thrown into Tartarus as a place in space. But the Hesiod version has it that they were born last, and that the Titans didn't want the giants and Cyclops, or Uranus didn't want the giants and Cyclops to be born, so he kept holding them inside of the womb of Gaia until the castration took place, and then the giants leaped out and helped in the battle of the Titans against Uranus and his generation. All of those different variants are all right, because each of them doesn't necessarily have to contradict, but they show a different side of the truth. The spiritual truths are so multifaceted and so many-sided that they can easily take a number of stories that tell the same thing. If we remember from a long time ago, when we first started studying Gaia, we compared Gaia among the Olympics to the egg in the Orphic cosmogony, the egg out of which the four-headed Phanes, as a four-headed dragon of wisdom, was born. And we said that Gaia, which means earth, we see that we have three names that mean earth, one being Gaia, one being Rhea, and another being Hera. They're all earth goddesses, and they each represent or mean earth in a different way. That Gaia as earth, the mystery schools in ancient times taught that the earth was not just the globe on which we sit, but that it is the whole orbit of that globe. So ultimately, it is the egg shape, the entire solar system as a little universe altogether. And in that regard, it is an egg. It is a condensation within the womb of space, interstellar space. And in that egg, everything comes to being and everything is born. And in that regard, it's perfectly all right to see the giants and everything else being born out of one egg. And we, of course, know that relative to the aura, or relative to our sphere of consciousness, the same principle of Earth being a place where things are manifest holds true. Now, it's going to be hard because I have to introduce you to some of the more difficult idiosyncrasies of myself at the same time. It so happens that I like dirty jokes. And I'm fascinated by them. I don't so much like them for the disgusting sexuality or the smuttiness of them, but I like them for the wit. And I like because they get right at the essence of humor in that they focus on our insecurity. All of the mystery schools from all times have talked about the abuse of sexuality as being the selfish abuse of sexuality, especially as being the source of all evil and what has brought us to become errant. And that in sexuality, I'm not just talking about the sexual act, I'm talking about the internal essence, the fire that is within it, that is the fire of creativity, all of our magical powers and everything else that is capable, that makes us capable of doing miracles or wonders or creative activity is brought about by the sexual energy. And all of us know that to some extent we have sexually abused that, and we have attached our selfish ego consciousness to the use or misuse of that energy, so that we have a lot of insecurity about it. And so when there are sexual jokes, they're focusing on where we have insecurity, because jokes are meant to relieve insecurity. I think Freud and some of the psychologists in that group or their followers came to the conclusion that we laugh because we have an insecurity relieved. You know, it's somebody else that gets the pie in the face. Or we can look at the absurdity of our own condition, or the juxtaposition of two very strange things right next to each other, but yet part of one reality. And when we can see that in a glance with one unity, we have our insecurity relieved and we can laugh. The Gaia story that we looked at in the poetic version, just as we were closing up, where everything, including the 100-armed and 50-headed giants that Uranus was not letting be born, comes into a variant of a dirty joke. And that is a dirty joke that is commonly called the big pussy joke. Freud, Richard Wagner would love it as a leitmotif. But it is the whole idea of our whole being, from the one, the supreme being, to ourself. We are all relatively insecure, because relative to the absolute, which is the womb or the potential in which everything becomes and everything could become, are even if you take on all of the different levels of being, not just the universe as far as it extends with galaxies and clusters of galaxies and such like that, but go into all of the inner dimensions, is as nothing relative to the absolute. And the potential of that is something that is very awing to any being or any level of being within manifest cosmos. So there is, relative to that absolute, manifest as space, the potential we call space, or the potential we call time. Both of them are stretchable wombs out of which everything is born, if relative to that we're all rather insecure. And you can see, I'm sure you've all heard those kinds of profane jokes of that type where someone loses a ring and goes looking for it and runs into somebody else who's lost a motorcycle or something like that. And those are the sorts of things that when I was married, my wife and I went and visited my parents. And my wife was wearing pantyhose. And they were way up to here because she was built rather unusual. And she had a midriff that was open, and she stretched herself like that, and the seam of the pantyhose showed. And I said to my mother, "See, look at her operation scar." And I just went up and up and up, and my mother's eyes just kept bugging out until all at once it dawned on her what I was pulling on her, and she couldn't stop laughing. And when you think about the incredible room of space and so much that isn't and yet is beyond our greatest capacity of understanding, it's the same kind of thing. This is why the ancient Chinese philosophers believed that from the beginning of it all, the great Logos, or the great creative fiat, they believed it was a laugh, because it was an insecurity on the part of the Supreme Being that was overcome by expressing this much of it and manifesting that much more. Okay, we're still catching up. The way the talks go is that 2/3 of the talks are reviews from last time. Only the reviews aren't anything like last time was. I have a kind of character that if you ask me to say something twice, the second time will be very different than the first. It comes from being a contrarian, a very defiant one, that I don't want to become repetitive, so I had developed a way of saying it all new each time. So what we're talking about is that there is an insecurity about the perpetual creation out of the womb of potential. And what is interesting about this is that the more wakingly conscious, the more wakingly self-conscious we become, to the point where we get to the consciousness of the Supreme Being, the greater there is the consciousness of how much more there is in the unconscious. And so even the Supreme Being is going through the to be or not to be of the whole cosmos. Okay, we could have again then, since in the Hesiod version the giants and Cyclops were the last born, we could have gone into the whole topic of birth order again, but we won't do that. Last time we talked about the death of Uranus, because we talked about the unusual conception that an extremely elder divinity like Uranus, which is so far beyond our ken of normal everyday consciousness, how a being like that could be said to die. And then we looked into the fact that it really wasn't a death, but that it was a death to all of the beings manifest below that in consciousness. We said that Uranus represents, in the same way that Eros, or Phanes, represents the consciousness of the will to be in the deepest attribute of the spirit that a human can understand, and this is a very unfolded human. Phanes, Eros then represents something like the Lords of the Flame. Uranus, by the same token, represented to the Orphics, as we saw earlier in the year, it represented the plane of consciousness that is called noetic and noeric, which we understand either as the Buddhic plane or as the plane of life spirit or Christ consciousness. And that this is the proto-creative consciousness out of which the power to form ideas is formed. It represents the pure imagination out of which imaginations are formed. And it represents the light of general truth without even being so much as an idea, that there is a truth that goes beyond ideas. And it represents the selfness in which all of selves are born. This is not egos, but even our higher consciousness of self resides in a consciousness of selfness. And that with the castration of Uranus, that consciousness was dead to us, and that all of the succeeding evolution for the beings from the Titans on down to us and the clods, so to speak, has lost that pure consciousness that transcends the transcendental. And we talked then, the main theme of last week was talking about the need in our separative egoism and our unsatisfaction with our current state of being, the need to reawaken or to resurrect Uranus, which is what Christian mysticism is all about, the getting beyond self. The problem of self being the problem of separation, and to destroy self is almost an impossible thing. It's to play God. And there is the difficulty of getting beyond ourself is not an easy one, but one that is absolutely necessary, because the egoism in our current state of self-consciousness is utterly destructive to ourselves and the rest of the universe. Now, that's what we talked about last time. Now we have one more transitional thing, and we're ready for tonight's talk. And it's a fascination. When we talked about the death of Uranus, Uranus prophesies at his death. He prophesies to Cronus, who has castrated him so that he bleeds to death. He said, you will have a child that will overthrow you. And this little interesting subtopic is one that I'm interested in, is prophetic abilities that come about at death, or prophetic abilities that come about as a consequence of being ill or being near to death, or even in an artificial death, such as black magicians who focus all of their hate and then take poison and project themselves out of the body and hope they had the right amount of poison, and do such like that. But this is a universal thing. If you remember, Jacob died or was near to death several times, and every time Jacob had 12 children, just like Uranus had 12 children. And remember Abraham, when he was supposed to sacrifice Isaac but didn't, because at the last minute Jehovah intervened. Jacob was told, your children will be as the stars, which is a very much misinterpreted passage of the Bible. Most people think that means that the children of Abraham will be as numerous as the stars. But if you look, the descendants, most notably Jacob, the grandson, has 12 children, and twice he comes near to death, and he prophesies for all of his children, and all of his children have the remarkable characteristics of being exactly like the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the whole quality of the being as the stars in heaven is that this is a sidereal myth of a astrological type. So we have the sky god, the grandfather, Uranus, and his prophecy comes something like this, only it's more like a curse. You shall have a child that shall dethrone you. Now, that's the whole question of the power, the creative power in the oath or the prophecy of Uranus as he's dying carries into the realm below him and it gets carried out. And it's a notion that is still with us, and that is the notion of wills and legacies and such like that. I'm not going to talk about any of the little sidelong things that I just mentioned, like why people are prophetic at death or such like that. I'm interested in one thing particularly, and we can just use it as one manifestation of the principle, because it hits on a topic that's very dear to me and is relative to hierarchy as we're looking at it. The question that I'm most interested in is if you've ever looked at a lot of religious and spiritual cults, which I've done quite a bit of doing, you'll notice that some religions die out after their founder dies, whereas others, when the founder dies, they take off with much more remarkable growth than they had when the founder was alive. And that's part of the same principle. The principle is, why do some religions, why does the legacy of them flourish when others founder after the founder dies? I love to play with words. It's a topic, it brings me to a topic that I've been thinking on for about 25 years. And in those last 6 or 7 years, I've made a lot of steps forward, and in pondering these talks for this class, especially the death of Uranus and the prophetic curse that he makes at that time, I've carried it a lot further. And that has to do with a topic that I call the realization of the dream. I'll try to talk to it at two levels, a cosmic level and a personal level, the personal level being where we have experience of it. We live in a creation, and that creation has within it an evolutionary structure. But that creation, just like the creation of a poem or a painting or any artistic work that we do, is based on an inner image. Everything that has come to be and that will come to be is based on the dream that the Supreme Being had in the first place. Any work of art, whether we're completely conscious of the internal dream or not, that we had before we created the work of art, is based on that. Now, there is always the possibility that the dream can be fruitless, and that it can be nothing more than a fantasy. In fact, if we just lay back and allow and live in our dream, it does become a fruitless fantasy. However, when we do manifest it, no matter how perfectly we try to put it out as a work of art, and no matter how great our skill is, it's never like what we had in the dream in the first place. But in the process of trying to realize the dream, it does change things. It changes things in a dark and dismal world, and when we turn back to the original dream is vivified, and it has a new life that gives birth to the next dream. And what the whole process that I'm interested in is the realization of the dream. Because to a large extent, God, as the Supreme Being, like ourselves, is playing make-believe. Make-believe in the unknown. But God is playing make-believe for keeps. And because it is for keeps, it is lived out as though it were real, somehow that takes something from the unknown potential of the Absolute that is congealed as matter by the actual emanation of the dream. It actually takes that ignorance, and somehow that ignorance gets experienced, and it gets experienced in such a way that it comes to be known. So that even for the Supreme Being, there is ever more light, because when something more is known, that is fuel for the enlightenment process of the entire Supreme Being, and all of us that take part in it. Now, this is a threefold process. We've talked about it before. It has to do with the materialization of spirit, where spirit, through the process of imagination and formation, materializes the essence of its being into form. The other way the direction goes from the level of perception, sometimes just brutal experience. Things go from experience, the matter is spiritualized. So spirit is materialized and matter is spiritualized, and in the whole process there is an evolution of consciousness based on soul material, so to speak, that comes through the realization process in that projection of spirit and in that digestion of ignorance or digestion of matter. Now, a number of years ago, there are problems in this, because as we all know, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, I had a friend who was going to become a philosopher. But he looked over the history of philosophy, and he saw that so many philosophers were well-to-do, so that they had time to think about things. And what he did was he figured that first he was going to make a bunch of money, and when he made a bunch of money, then he would have the time to become a philosopher. And so he started buying up houses in the student area here, and one time he had about 30 houses, and it was sort of like a dominoes thing. One was financing the other, and he got to the point that he didn't want to support all of that anymore. It got to be too much for him, and somehow he let go of one, and everything came tumbling down. But what happened was, the more and more he got into making a lot of money to become a philosopher, the more and more he got away from philosophy and into becoming a materialist. And he became attached to matter. He didn't really play make-believe for keeps. He worshipped the illusion. He worshipped the reflection of himself or of his efforts in matter. And there is a fancy term that Hindus and Buddhists use for this. They call it samsara, when you get attached to your incarnate activity. So there are a number of pitfalls in the whole process. On one hand, you can become an idle dreamer, and you can live in fantasy, or you can throw yourself into matter and get stuck in it. You can become a sensualist, or you can worship the illusion and be lost and stuck in it and never reap anything out of it. And the question I have been pondering for the last 7 or 8 years is, how do the great spiritual beings who planted in our becoming nature, how were they able to plant the potentiality for selfhood, which we eventually wakened up? How could they enter into the creation like that and not get hooked? You know, parents get hooked on their children, and it takes a very violent rebellion by the children, or child nations. It takes revolutions to free themselves from parent nations that lay heavy trips on them. And the conclusion, some of you were in the class, and this is a topic that's come up for a number of times in the last few years, is that the way the beings called the Lords of the Flame, that are symbolized by Phanes, the way they did that is they gave of themselves so thoroughly that they burned out egoism, that they weren't attached, that they gave of themselves in such a way that if they had hung on to any vestige of selfness or of selfishness about, or pride or anything like that, they couldn't have accomplished their task, and they would have been locked into their work forever. And it's sort of like the same principle that if you're playing football, that if you give like a full effort, you're much more likely to get through without being injured than if you give a half-hearted effort, you're more likely to injure yourself. And so the quality was there. But now the quality of Uranus, oh boy, I'm so far away from my notes. I've got a whole different talk in my notes, and I don't know if I'll ever find my way back to them. So the whole principle that we're talking about is how does a creative being give life to something as a creative work and not be attached to it? And how does that life flourish? And previously I said that it had to be an all-out effort. But now, after doing a lot of examination of the Uranus death principle, it appears that it really is more than just a clean-cut, all-out effort. It is literally a life and death effort. That is a religion, or if a religious founder or the founder of a sect gives of self totally, all the way, ultimately to the death, not only of self, but of everything that is behind self in spiritual power, if one gives all of that to death, that is what brings alive, and that is what germinates, and that is literally what engenders a creative effort that is going to be alive. Catherine will probably have to vouch for me. She usually vouches for me every week. She's the proof of the pudding that Catherine's an artist, and a very good artist. And what usually happens is I set her up like this, and she cringes every time that I do it. And I set her up to say, Catherine, is this true? And she not only tells me, yes, it's true, but she outdoes it. And that is that the work of art, that you put more of yourself into, to the point that something of you personally dies in the act, that you just give it up totally, and something dies for the sake of that, is the art that lives the most. True? I'm saying that do you become ever more purged in yourself, and does more of your ego die with the more art that you do? Well, all right. I'll go along with it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you finish yourself. I didn't really create this, this sort of there. I just
All right. All right. Do you find yourself becoming more humbled as life goes on? As your artistic life proceeds?
Well, yeah, you learn a lot more. You realize how foolish you are.
Okay. I'm putting you on the spot. Yes.
I said in Lisa, and when I saw it, I went to see it because I wanted to know what the talks were about. And so I was rather cynical in my approach. I was going to really give it the once over. And so when I approached, of course, there was a group of people around it, and it totally caught me off guard. And the one word that came to mind was sublime. And I had the sense that, well, one thing, it's the most perfect painting I've ever seen, and it was much smaller than I imagined it to be, but the one thing that came to mind was I had the sense that the man's soul was in it. And so when something of you dies, when you give yourself so totally to your art, whatever it may be, that's what endures.
Well, that's what they spot at art school. How much of an effort you've really made. I don't know. You're right. If you've really got into it, it doesn't really matter what you've done. Somehow it's very much appreciated. You've only made kind of half-hearted effort, right at the last minute or whatever. And people seem to do it. No, it's not perfect at all. It has to be full of flaws.
I got surprised like that once too. I went down about 23 years ago at the Chicago Art Institute. They had a Rembrandt collection from all over the world, and I was milling through. It was crowded. It was like almost like a parade more than anything. Everybody was walking through, and all at once I came around the corner and I was standing in front of Lucretia, the Rape of Lucretia, and immediately I burst into tears because it was just so moving what he captured, and what was, especially the eyes. It's the only thing that lives for me anymore. All right. So, in this whole cosmological process, there are two deaths. One is sort of like the death that comes in the manifestation of the dream. Everybody who's ever practiced Carl Jung's active imagination knows that it works really easily. But from a mystical point of view, it's a fraud. Because the true thing of imagination is not how rapidly you can make the pictures change, but how much you can slow them down. Where you can take an imagination and slow it down to the point that it seems stopped, that it seems absolutely dead. The things that surround us and that preoccupy our consciousness all day long are made out of stuff that is in imagination from a very exalted level that is held to the point where it is dead. And literally, you might say it's a compliment to say that God is dead. So this is a principle that, remember when we were talking about the whole Orphic notion, the principle of bringing the cosmos to death, and it has to do with the whole principle of distribution. Remember that in the transcendental realms, everybody is one. But when we come to the phenomenal realms, it becomes the many. And there are all of these myriad of beings that are around, and that's because that is necessary. Because in order to manifest all that needs to be manifest in the cosmos, it requires a large number of separate individual foci. So there is the whole quality of separation and concentration that has to do with death. All right, we'll leave that sit. We're going to come back to all of this later on. The second death is literally the giving up of knowledge, the giving up of self. We've talked a lot over the years how along the pole of being, that in one direction, in the direction of time, in that potential, everything is spirit. And in the direction of space, everything is manifest as matter. And that in the direction of spirit, it is in the direction... For friends, I have enough tapes that I could break very well. I sell them at $2 a tape. And I could break a wealthy person at that. I have a very dear friend from India who's not much talking to me now because of what I've done to Hindu myths. She's fascinated by it, but it's altogether different. And when she hears what I'm going to do to Greek myths in a few weeks, she's going to say he's going to do it to all cultures. No, things of the spirit are of the past. They are known, even if they're reborn again and again. Things of matter are things of ignorance, things that are unknown, and things that are of the future. Because through the experience of matter, we give birth to the soul power for new consciousness. So the second death then is not just the death of liveliness in a stopped imagination, but the second death is the giving up the selfness quality or the awakening quality of spirit in order to give oneself thoroughly to matter. Because you have to give it up. Everything you know, everything you are, you have to give in order for it to not be just a half-hearted, a little bit better than a fantasy. So this involves the whole process of giving up ourselves to something unknown. And this takes place on all different levels. Obviously, the result of it is what we've been talking about. There are two kinds of life. One is the life that takes place in the things that we've loved, the things that we've brought to life. Oh, it's gardening season. I'm thinking about that already. After this year of doing so much intellectual work all summer long, all I'm going to do is go walking in state parks and tend the garden. I have to go to work every day, but that's not a matter. And the second kind of life is like the revivification of the dream and the reawakening in spirit, something fresh and new from having given self to that impossible awakening of ignorance. In ourselves, we seem to be alternating. We as humans seem to give ourselves half-heartedly, and we go back and forth between life and death. And it's a process that little by little we learn to give more of ourselves, and little by little we wake up more, and little by little we have the joy of more things coming to life from us. So let's let that whole topic die, and we're not ready to get on. We're going to bring it back. But we have a whole bunch of other things like what we're going to talk about tonight. Now that the warm-up is done. I've done talks where, I call them ivory talks, where 99 44/100% of the talk is review, and only the last, that's the way it is in the cosmos. You recapitulate everything that you've ever done before from all the different points of view and all the way through, and at the very end of the whole business you get to look into the eye of God. Exactly, recapitulate everything. Yeah? See, she's going to do it to me again. And there's not a week that goes by. She's a natural. She gives herself all the time to everything. She doesn't even have much ego to give up at all. All right. That's not meant as a... All right. So we'll have a little bit of storytelling tonight. In the storytelling, it tells about what happens to Cronus after he kills his father Uranus in the castration. There's some improvement. At least he doesn't marry his mother, who is also his grandmother, because if he did that, it would really be a mix-up. His mother would then both be his mother and his grandmother and his wife. Fortunately, he didn't do something so obscene as that. Though that's possible. In the realm of chaos, there are so many unions and interconnections. The closer that you get to oneness, everything is connected to everything in every other direction. And that's possible. That's why they have all of these incest stories in the mythology. But he didn't do those kinds of perverse things. He just married his sister instead. And because this is on a very high spiritual level, it was fruitful. And every year she had a child. But Cronus was wily and worried. We all know Cronus is our Saturn. You know that Saturn is the worry wart and the very wily, clever, the loophole finder. He's sort of the cosmic shyster. And he's worried, and Saturn always remembers. If anybody's going to learn something in one instance, one mistake is enough for Saturn. That's not, like people like myself, I make the same dumb mistakes over again and again. They're not the Saturnine people. Once is enough. And so he was aware, and he always remembered his father's curse. So he practiced a rather unusual kind of birth control. And his form of birth control was that as soon as his children were born, he swallowed them whole. Which means he not only got old, but like most people, as you get old, you get waistline expansion. And he did this first with his daughter Hestia, and then with Demeter, and then with Hera. We got the names here. And then with his first son Hades, and then with Poseidon. He had 6 children in all. And by the time it got around to Zeus being born, Rhea, being a mother, outraged. She says, no more of this. No more. So she went to Mount Lycaeum in Arcadia. And this is all, just that line in itself. Arcadia, that word in itself, we could talk all semester about Arcadia and how even, the Knights of Malta and all of those organizations like Henry Kissinger and all those people belong to, those are power groups that are founded around Arcadian seekers. Arcadia, the princes of Arcadia were the son of Polaris, and all of that comes down to believing in Merovingian kings having the blood of Jesus in them and all of that. It's you've heard of Arcadian myths. That's quite a bit, but we won't go into that. But at any rate, she goes there in the dead of night. And the story is that on Mount Lycaeum, no creature sees its shadow. It's that dark, and no creatures even come around Mount Lycaeum in the dead of night. And there she gives birth to the child. Now we're going to talk about this all over again next week when we talk about the birth of Zeus and about Zeus's life, and all the rest of it's going to be about Zeus's love affairs for the rest of the year. talk about profane, because it all has to do, because through Zeus is the end of the establishment of the transcendental hierarchy. If you have the transcendental hierarchy, it automatically reflects into the phenomenal hierarchy, and we're going to tie it all back together with Orphic theogony, and we're going to look at the whole cosmos and leave it set at that for Greek, and then next year we'll talk about Norse mythology, and we're going to tie it all together with a whole bunch of other things, I hope. I have great dreams, but I never can accomplish all of those things probably because I talk too much along the way. So at any rate, she gives birth to Zeus, and she takes all sorts of cautions to secret him away and hides him in a way that nobody would ever find him. And what she does is she takes a stone about the same size as Zeus, and she wraps it in swaddling clothes, and when Cronus comes to her, she gives it to him, and he trusts his wife. That's the downfall of Capricorns. They always trust their wives, or they always trust their husbands. That's the one place, because they've known them for a long time, they figure they're never going to pull anything. And he takes it and he swallows it. Didn't even notice the difference. And that's what happens. If you're a glutton, I've had to fight with gluttony all my life. And any time that you have that sort of a thing where you're not living in reality, you don't do things right. Gluttons probably enjoy their food less than ascetics do. Because if you're just going to put 2 barley grains under your lips the way the Tibetan monks do, and that's it for the day, you get every bit of appreciation, and you don't have, you don't have to use monosodium glutamate or shrimp or whatever it is to be your taste enhancers. Being a sometimes glutton, sometimes you're eating your breakfast and you're not enjoying your breakfast because you're thinking about what you're going to have for supper. you know what I mean? And if you're such a glutton that you're swallowing everything whole, you're probably not paying any attention at all to what you're eating. It all works out. But at any rate, Zeus does grow up, and when he reaches manhood, he visits his ancestor Metis, and she isn't on here. She's on the Orphic chart, but we're going to put her on here next week. He visits her, and she tells him that what he should do is he should put a lot of salt and a lot of mustard in his father's cup of mead or nectar or whatever it was that the gods drank. They usually ate ambrosia and drank nectar. And he does that, and Cronus is as much of a glutton about drinking as he is about eating. And he takes a big drink of it, and the first thing Cronus was a puker. And he regurgitates first the stone, and then the boys, and then the girls. And they're so overjoyed, they're grown up by now. They're so overjoyed that they elect him their leader, and they make war on the Titans. And the Titans, because Cronus is now old, mostly from so much worrying and bad diet, that they elect Atlas, who isn't on the chart, but we'll put him on the chart next week, because this gets amazingly complicated. This is only one half of the chart. We did the other half, the descent from night and the descent from discord. We did that a few weeks back. We're going to do this all. We're going to get it on a computer, and we're going to have the different, like relationship lines in one color and families in another. You make a great big chart like that nobody will ever be interested in. It'll be a great money losing project, and we're going to carry it right down so everybody can connect their family tree to it, and they can follow it right back up into chaos. So the Titans choose Atlas as their leader, and the first thing that Zeus does is he goes to Tartarus, And when he goes to Tartarus, there's a woman that's mentioned one place and one place only in all of mythology. And we're not going to go into most of the details because there's just so much in the little minutiae of these stories that we could go on and on and on and on. And be as long-winded as I am, I don't even want to go on that long. But there's a woman at the doors to Tartarus named Campe, C-A-M-P-E, which means crooked. And Zeus walks up to her and he kills her. And he steals the keys from her and he opens the doors of Tartarus. And what happens is the giants and Cyclops all come running out. And Cyclops are so happy that they give him a thunderbolt to make war with. And so the younger gods and the giants and the Cyclops all make war against the Titans. Only they're good gods. They don't kill any of them. They just drive them all into Tartarus, all but one. And they don't lock the doors. They don't believe in complete repression. And that's why they're smart. They're generous. And Zeus paints two pictures with one stroke. He then has giants and Cyclops. He says, you guys are important to me. You're important to the universe. You've got to guard Tartarus so the Titans don't get back out. So they're all in Tartarus, and Zeus then rules in heaven afterwards. And only Atlas, who led the Titans, doesn't have to go down to Tartarus, but he's left with the eternal punishment of having to hold up the heavens forever after that, so that heaven and earth are forever separated. From then on, Zeus ruled heaven and earth in a way. All right, that's the story part for tonight. Now comes the denouement. Story lasts 5 minutes. The denouement will last another 2 hours. I'm between you and the door. All right. We're going to defer a lot of the story until future weeks, and some of it we're going to decline altogether because it's just too much. And, I used to decline to do things because I always wanted to save something for later. But then I realized that you don't have to worry about that. You can give and give and give, and the more deeply you go into things and the more you give, the more there is to give. So you don't ever have to worry about holding back. And it's only those people that want to live in fantasy and hang on to egoism rather than burning it out or giving themselves up in death that, they're always holding back, and they got that terrible grin on their face that says, it's more like a smug smile that says, I know something that you don't know, and I think that's great without having the fellowship of sharing everything, and everybody has it, But at any rate, I just now I'm getting older. When I was young and I first had a little mystical experience, I felt I could do anything and that I could do everything. Now that I'm old, I sound like it, don't I? I still feel I can do anything, but I realize that I can't do everything, so some things just have to be passed on, so we're going to pass on most of the story. There is a lot of profundity in it. Mythology is an ultra shorthand, and it's an ultra shorthand of something that is an integral whole. And because it is truly the language of the spiritual world. Because God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit. And all of the divinities that live within God, that's what the stories are about. And the stories are literally their life. And so if God is in everything and we're all part of that, everything is in everything else. It's a great occult maxim. Everything is in everything, from the littlest atom or the littlest object on up. Everything is connected. Everything is a miniature of something greater than itself. So what we're talking about in this battle is the transference of consciousness and of control and of creative activity from one level to another in microcosm and macrocosm. It's a simple story, but if everything is in everything, there is such a unity, it gets to be like Mozart with his symphonies. He would discover a completed plot of a symphony. He would just like Kronos. He'd swallow it whole. He'd have the whole thing all at once. He didn't know how to delineate it. And so what he would do is he'd go to a pool table and he would watch pool balls bounce around, and in that he would just sort of find a pattern. From that pattern would be a way that he could unravel something that was an integral whole. And the normal thing that is used for unraveling integral wholes in myths, just as in dreams, are the details. When you start looking at a detail, the detail gives you an inroad into the story, and then you find that the detail and the story and the spiritual life that is behind the story are all one and the same thing. And so we'll look at some of the trivial details, and we'll look at them some in a rather trivial way. Kronos and Rhea have 6 offspring, unlike Uranus and Gaia, who had 12 offspring. Now, these numbers and mathematical operations, as we're going to look at them, we're going to look at them in a more symbolic way. We're not going to look at them with all of the philosophical niceties, the way the Platonists and the Pythagoreans and the other Orphics did, the way we talked about them when we talked about Orphic cosmogony. We're looking at it in a much simpler way than that. But we're looking at this as a transference of responsibility and of creative activity deeper into the realms of matter. And in that process, when it goes from 12 titans down to 6 gods, it represents a whole process of concentration and of fusion of a number of things together. So just by the very number of 6, it's talking about that there is a reduction. Part of the reduction is that everything is not so universal anymore, but things are brought down to a level where it's a concentration on fewer things, but those fewer things have more specialization and more different powers concentrated in a fewer number of beings. So the result of it is a much more colorful, lively. The generation of the gods is much more lively and colorful and multifaceted than the generation of the titans. In fact, the further back you go, the more it gets to simple unity. Oh boy, I'm going to cut an awful lot. I'm beginning to have kidney pains, and it's a sign I'm really tired. Let's pass on some of this and look at the number 6 for another reason. The number 6 is the number of the macrocosm, just as the number 5 is the number for the microcosm, and it represents the principle of analogy as it is manifest in the material realm. The number 5 being associated with a 5-pointed star, which is built by dividing a line means in extreme, which is the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, because when you divide a line means in extreme, you divide it in such a way that this piece is to this piece as this piece is to the whole line segment. And that's the principle, this is to this as this is to that. That's the principle of analogy in the microcosm. The principle of analogy as it functions in the macrocosm is the reflection of the two triangles in a six-pointed star. And so the six children at the lowest level of the transcendental realm, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. The number 6 there represents that abstract completion that is the result of a reflection. We've talked about a number of these things at great length, so I don't want to talk about them anymore. So you can't say the same thing again over and over and over. It's an interesting thing that in the birth, the females are born first. We're following our convention here that firstborns are always to the left. And so Hestia is the firstborn. The 3 women are born first, and the 3 men follow after. And in each case, both among the females and among the males, Hestia is sort of a vague hearthfire type of individuality, and things focus down to Hera being a very dramatic Earth mother. And then we have blind Hades coming down to the bright, well-differentiated Zeus. So there is a general tendency in the details of the story of proceeding from feminine to masculine and proceeding from vague to definitive. We're talking about a passage from an internal kind of creativity to an external extenuation. That is, when we are manifest in an incarnation as a female, our creativity is more manifest unconsciously within us in our womb. And even our whole creative organs or procreative organs are all hidden within. When we are manifest in the incarnation as a male, we tend to be much more outward. We're out there trying to conquer something or build a railroad or something like that. And that there is a dramatic, weak vulnerability by the extenuation even of the sexual organs that produces a greater vulnerability. So the whole quality is then that in the creative process of the passing from the highest or the firstborn to the lastborn, it is going from an internalized state to a more externalized state, from an inner to an outer. Now, it is really interesting, the consciousness that takes place in the womb is gestatory, whereas our consciousness in the world is death-dealing. It's very analytical. We break things apart. We tear things apart. Now, if you think about the whole process, what is taking place within each of these groups and within the whole creation process is what's taking place in the whole story. Everything is going from the gestatory activity in the womb of Rhea to being born and then going into the digestatory process of Kronos. So things are going from a state of unconscious growing and building, but to maturing in a state of consciousness. Digestion means breaking apart or separating. And so the whole process of creativity, as it is represented here, states that things go from a musing of imagination to a manifestation, but before that manifestation can come to its full waking consciousness, it is again internalized, and it is internalized in such a way that it is dissected and that it undergoes a death-like process until it comes to maturity, and then it is born with a full brightness. So we're looking at then something with what Zeus represents is the first true birth of selfhood, the brightness of waking consciousness. Previous to the birth of Zeus, all of the things that go into the production of an individual self, which is a microcosm of the whole cosmos, which has like a planetary consciousness, just like an atom has a planetary consciousness of a solar system, and all of the characteristics that are part of our ego, that are broken up into different astrological elements. When we say we have Aries-like qualities in us, or we have Jupiterian qualities within us, all of those things were first born as wholes within us, and then they were recycled and explicated, and then they came to birth wide as a whole. All of this is taking place in inclusive cycles of time, one a year, and then the cycle of time of maturity of Zeus. So we could say a lot more about this. We'll just leave that drop, and we'll try to come back to that in a little bit. Now, we mentioned it very briefly earlier. Oh, we get into something that's so enormously big now, and it's all the rest of the night seem like nothing. We said earlier that we had 3 Earth Mothers so far. We had Gaia, who represented the Earth that is the whole solar cosmos. Then we have Rhea, which we'll talk about. We're ready to talk about that now? No. Yes, let's talk about it. Rhea represents Earth. Boy, I'm going to have to remember something that you guys weren't here for. But you probably, if you studied a lot of Gnosticism, are probably familiar with it. The consciousness of a human in microcosm and of God in macrocosm is broken up into a physical form with a vitality within that, and that lives and allows and makes for movement. And behind that is another level of being in which we exist as beings of feeling, emotion, desire, that motivate the living, moving stuff to actually live and move the form. And behind that is mind. And the mind is divided between a concrete mind where we have discrete thoughts, and those thoughts are what give meaning and direction to the motivations, passions, desires that bring us to action and result in concrete experience. Those represent the phenomenal realms. But the other half of the mind, so to speak, is in the ideational realm. Thoughts are born out of ideas. Ideas, in turn, are born out of pure life, out of pure light, and out of pure love and imagination. That is the realm of Uranus. And beyond that is the will to be, which is represented by Hades or Eros. So will and imagination are the divine father and mother, and from them come conceptions, and those conceptions are ideas. And it is in an hourglass fashion that here is the focus of self, and these are the phenomenal realms, that the deepest of the ideational realms is called the realm of geminal ideas of form. And Uranus, as we said before, getting into something really technical. Do you know much about Neoplatonism? About the celestial and the sub-celestial arc in the realm of the noetic noeric? The sub-celestial arc we're postulating in this course as the sickle of Uranus, of Kronos, that captures Uranus and projects all of the consciousness first to Zeus and then into the phenomenal realms. And that Kronos represents the general ideas of form. In that regard, Rhea represents the general ideas of substance, because forms have to be, this is why sister and brother are married to each other, because forms cannot exist without substance, and the idea of form cannot exist without the idea of substance, and so the earth that is Rhea is the fundamental idea as an abstract idea, so that we can even understand an element like water or liquid or something like that, that there is a universal idea of that, and that is what is represented by Rhea. And finally, there is the earth that is Hera, and that earth represents all of the whole phenomenal realms all together. So it's something pretty heavy. Now, when we looked at Gaia, we looked at her in several ways. We looked at her as the egg, and we also looked at her as the earth, and the earth was the whole solar system. And we left that whole thing dangling. We said that the earth, the egg-shaped orbits of the solar system, or earth as solar system, represented the womb and body of Gaia. Now, it's a curious thing, and Madame Blavatsky mentions it in a very laughing way. What we've been talking about is the descendancy from Uranus to Kronos, or Saturn, and now to Zeus. And Madame Blavatsky just says in a laughing way, well, that just talks about the orbits of the outer planets. And when Madame Blavatsky laughs, it usually means that you should perk up your ears and look, because she writes in an obfuscatory manner, and she usually covers the deepest and most profound things with a joke. She laughs at them because they have very, very heavy meaning. Like when she talks about the seven-branch candlestick, she mocks it. But the seven-branch candlestick has the whole of the cosmological formula built right into it. And the same is true. So we're going to spend the rest of the night talking about Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. And we'll try to tie together everything that we've said before now. Rudolf Steiner talks about the myth of Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter descending. He's talking about that in terms of the cosmos, the solar cosmos, and its extent coming into greater degrees of concentration and expansion. Nice, but there's actually much more. And we're going to talk about that much more right now, because these three planets are part of an entire sequence. And that sequence is not necessarily the order of the planets as they appear in the heavens from the sun outward. The sequence goes like this: Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and here we are on Earth. This is called, this part, Alpha Uranus, is called the ladder of the stars. And the order of the ladder of the stars represents the order of initiation for learning to leave the physical and to go to the various spiritual realms. The first thing that we overcome is the basic biological traits. The last thing that we overcome is destiny itself. If we can get beyond the law, we get to the realm of Uranus, which is the realm of complete freedom. So Saturn is sort of like the gatekeeper. And so we have in this sequence of Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the break, and then Uranus, because he's been castrated and dead to us right now. We have probably one of the most profound things in all mystery teachings. It has all kinds of things in it. It represents the sequence of an entire cosmological framework, and it's going to be things that I've talked about for years and that we'll continue to talk about for years. But by looking at this sequence in different mathematical ways, one gets an understanding of the whole cosmos. For example, if you take the 24 hours of the day, start counting with moon. And if you count 24 hours, the next one will come out Mars. And you count the next 24 hours, it comes out Mercury. Next 24 hours comes out Jupiter. Next 24 hours comes out Venus. Next 24 hours comes out Saturn. Comes out Sunday. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. All of the days of the week, which tie in, and we won't go into it now because it's enormously long, all of the periods of time, as well as all of the states of matter called globes or states of material existence, are based on the cosmological sequence of the days of the week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You're familiar with all of that. That's one sequence. If you take another sequence, you come out with Saturn, Mars. Where do we go from there? Venus, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury. I forget the sequence. Remember the sequence of metals according to Paracelsus? The sun is on the top, gold is on the top, and then there's the moon as silver, and then there's Mercury, and there's Venus as copper, and Jupiter as tin, Mars and lead. The actual realms of existence as they layer into each other is indicated in another sequence that comes out of here, and, like you can tie the whole universe together with that. So all of that is tied together. The ladder of the stars is mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned in a curious way when Jesus talks about that angels ascend and descend on the Son of Man. The Son of Man talks about humanity as being the turning point of the whole cosmos from the involution into matter and the evolution out of matter in the whole process that we've been talking about in the materialization of spirit, the spiritualization of matter, and the evolution of consciousness through soul growth as a result of experience in the involutionary and evolutionary process. That is on the ladder of the stars. The Saturn and Jupiter are very important in that they represent the outermost planets, and anything new that is coming from the spiritual realms as creative qualities come in under the conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter, and anything that's passing out of existence as a phase also pass out under the conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter. They're called the trigons of Saturn and Jupiter. See, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the relationship of pure creative stuff to the process of materializing creative stuff to the actual realization of it when we're talking about Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. I'm cutting this very, very short because I'm tired. If I'm tired, you're tired because you just have to sit there and sit there and sit there. I don't think we're going to keep it under 90 minutes, and that's a no-no. Saturn represents the unconditioned Uranus represents the unconditioned creativity. Saturn represents the skin. Everything takes place at the skin, the buffer between the inner and the outer. So important to the whole spiritual life, what we give out to the world and what we take in, how much we can maintain that buffer, how clear and clean we can keep that buffer is where all of our health relative to the microcosm being healthy within the macrocosm is dependent on what happens at the skin. Jupiter represents the activity within the crucible, within our being, and it represents where things are manifest and where things are accomplished and where things come to light. Jupiter, astrologically speaking, is the alchemical captain. It also works within the buffer, in the same way that it works in the cosmos. That from outside of Saturn represents the transcendental realms. Inside of Saturn represents the phenomenal or manifest states of existence. The same thing is true within our own aura. There is a stratification. But the important part is what is at the skin, what comes in new from without, and how we meet that from within ourselves. We're going to pass on all of that because all of that is many, many years worth of study. Because we can look at all these principles relative to a lot of other things. We want to look especially at how this works in the cosmogony, the birth of consciousness, because after all, we just can't sit here and talk about all these things. If we only talked about all of these things, the talk wouldn't be any good. It would be just another form of daydreaming. It would be another form of fantasizing. And we all know that fantasizing is where all of the ego comes in, because everything is just the way you want it to be in a fantasy. And it is when things are living that we give ourselves up to death that it comes to light. So we began talking last talk about Uranus, Varuna, and Christ, all being the same being, astrologically among the Hindus, Varuna. One of my Hindu friends did a lot of research for me, and I was telling him about the ideas in Neoplatonism and other forms of mysticism, how Uranus represented the Buddhic plane and the Varuna consciousness. And he said, do you know that the Hindus have a statement that goes, wherever two or more people are gathered together, there is another one that is always there. You know who that is? Varuna. So it's much older than Christ, only it was Christ who brought the living embodiment of that into the physical. But we talked about the necessity that we are coming to the Zeusian consciousness. And in that, we are coming to it through our activity. And we're subject to the Zeusian hubris. And every effort we make in ourselves to get beyond ourselves just becomes a Zeusian or Jupiterian exaggeration of selfness. We're playing God. And what we need is to get to the selfness, that which is beyond self, which means the resurrection of Uranus. We were talking about that, Jupiter as the grandson and Uranus as the grandfather. Now we want to pick that up. And we want to pick that up relative to our own consciousness. All of the mystery schools claim that true spiritual initiation has to do with the awakening of the human spirit and the life spirit. The realm that is the realm of Zeus and the realm that is the realm of Uranus. And that when we awaken to our spiritual nature and see it in parallel to the experiences in the external world, both through the pituitary and the pineal in the body and through the way life works its way into physical forms, that when we get to see the life that is engendered within the physical form, we have clairvoyance. And when we have the awakening in spirit of the two types of insight from the human spirit and the life spirit, we understand the spiritual truth that is within the clairvoyance, and we then have true spiritual sight, and we're not just some psychics, and we're not just insightful people that have no understanding of what goes on in the world. That is what our goal is. So the whole process then of awakening our consciousness has to do with the death of Uranus, passing into the worlds and awakening them. Now we're back at the topic again of the resurrection of Uranus and of the death wish. When we experience things going back to the Uranian consciousness, we experience them in a different order. Because if you remember, when Zeus gave the mustard and salt to Kronos and he regurgitated them in reverse order. The stone came out first, and then the boys, and then the girls. It's a principle that is obviously true. It's seen in a number of ways in the Bible. It says, and the first shall be last, is the way it is said in the book of Revelation. And in St. John's Gospel it is, he that cometh after me is preferred before me because he was before me. And all of this has to do with, it's like putting on our clothes every morning. We can awaken into the spiritual principle every day. We don't put on our underwear last. We put on our underwear and we put layer after layer after layer on. And to return, we have to go in reverse order. And the order of things and the outlook of things is very different. So that the whole realization of Uranus passing in death in his will and his death will that brings life to all of the from the world of thought to our material existence is different than our experience of coming back to the universal consciousness. It is in reverse order. And there's a really interesting phenomenon like this. It takes place in music. If you're familiar, especially in spiritual music, they have different scales, ascending versus descending scales, and that they use a different set of notes when they ascend rather than when they're descending because it brings out a different kind of meaning. The resurrection and awakening that we are seeing or trying to understand is a resurrection of, we were first had the Uranian consciousness, and then we cut ourselves off from that. And when we cut ourselves off from that, we gave ourselves totally to matter, but we came into being in that giving process. So it is the descending scale is just like the descending of the children of Kronos. It is a greater and greater concentration where we give ourselves ultimately to the death. However, the realization of the spiritual consciousness that we're looking for is a realization of release. And it's a realization of expansion where we let go. But it's not a rip-tear kind of let go. It is a very controlled concentration kind of letting go, because when we have once come to the characteristic of the Saturnian kind of control, we just don't explosively let go. We do so with control. And we just don't retreat. We just don't go back to that kind of consciousness. What we do once we have penetrated by consciousness, the Zeusian consciousness is a total kind of permeability consciousness. And we pass through. And it is by, remember, when we talked the last time, we talked about Kronos lay in ambush for Uranus. Because the Uranian consciousness, as wondrous as it is, can't penetrate. It is the consciousness of the realms that we live in. It's opaque to that kind of consciousness. But when we have taken the divine light all the way down to the point that we have given ourselves unto the death in the experience of something and given our life to it, we pass through it. And the resurrected consciousness is a consciousness that passes through. So that in our spiritual exercises, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to concentrate and bring something to the point where we can look at something and see every facet of it in stopped action, and that we have objectified it. We've taken something out of the state where it is in the womb, and we have digested it, and we can look at it in a complete objectivity, and when we give ourselves to it, we pass through it. See, the quality of the fantasy is the quality it always reflects back on you. There's no life in a fantasy because there's nothing to fight with. There's nothing to pass through. When you struggle with something or when you engage with something, you pass into it. And with our consciousness, if we can look at the things that we see in our perception or the things that we project in our spiritual activities, in our exercises, we literally pass through them and we see the meaning that is behind them. But at no time do we ever lose control. When we see what is behind them, we can pass all the way back to the original meanings that are behind them, and we do so with the perpetual life, the perpetual rejuvenescence of the Uranian type of consciousness from the noetic, noeric, or the Christ consciousness kind of level. And so the whole principle, so we have a number of things here. We have the principle of giving ourselves to life, giving ourselves thoroughly so that we pass into things and pass through. We take things and we bring them as close as we can to a stopped action, and that stopped action gives us the ability to understand and to objectify and externalize, and then we can pass right through to these spiritual worlds. And all right, I have a whole bunch of other things I want to say, but I just don't want this to be too long and for it to drag on. Next time we will go back and look at the birth of Zeus all over again and start getting into some of his sexual escapades. And we may start meeting once a week because I have a number of things that I'd like to get through, because we can't leave the universe completely unfounded. We can't leave it until the last bit. We've got to found it all the way, and then we can spend summer in the garden. Questions? Spiritual exercises are with the full empowerment of our spiritual being, our selfhood, using the faculties that we have to the utmost. A physical exercise, or like a musical exercise, you do things to warm up your fingers so that you can get the better function from them. With the spiritual exercise, you take a special time and work on observation to develop all of the abilities of it without necessarily using it as you do it in everyday life, or that you focus the mind, or that you focus your feelings. and they are all methods of bringing the will and the imagination and all of the forces of the spirit to bear on the things that we use in our everyday life, only with greater emphasis and greater concentration, so that they're vivified and brought to light and make life more useful every day. Simple things like concentration. There are various types of memory exercises to make connections between cause and consequence and such like that. Not too weird, I hope. Good. Yes. I said in spiritual, the more types of music that are more spiritual. I'm thinking particularly in the ragas, when they're bringing you to different states of consciousness, when they're proceeding down a scale. If there's a raga, it's not quite like a key signature, but it's similar to it. And when they're doing the downward passages, they use a different set of notes than when they're doing the upward passages. And in effect, the whole scale has one quality or has one tone to it, but there's a different feeling to it in descending than in ascending.
Is this anything like the line?
Yes, yes. In some of the old musical theory books yet, there are different minor ascendings and descending scales. Yes. Yeah, yeah, and they have a totally different feel to it. No. Yes. They didn't. They just locked them up. They just put them back in Tartarus. I think that there is a psycho-spiritual principle there that if you continuously gaze on the grandeur that came before you and the realms that are above and beyond you, it sort of dwarfs you and you don't accomplish. And you're always looking upward and you don't get about doing your own work. And sometimes, we talked about it a little bit either the last time we met or the time before. Like in the animal kingdom where there isn't self-consciousness, the parents drive the young away. Like birds will push the little ones out of the nest, or foxes or bears will drive the cubs away because they're to be on their own. But in humans, where we come to a waking self-consciousness, we get blessed with a misconception of things. We think that old people don't know how to do it right. And we cut ourselves off from them and say, I don't want the old man standing over my shoulder. I want to do it my way because he didn't do so damn well. You know, like, look at the world is a mess. And it is necessary to do that, to develop the confidence in yourself and to take a running start at life with that kind of confidence. Without, if everybody is that much better, that's before you, then you don't have enough confidence in yourself to go ahead and do it. And beside, if you're going into a totally different realm and you're doing something that nobody else has ever done before, you have to cut yourself off. You have to look. You can't accept the past as the right way. Everything that was done in the past was fine and dandy. I think the Neoplatonists did a great job, but we've got to do a better job in our times because our consciousness is different now. We've got to carry it further. The same thing, look at astrologers. Astrologers are some of the worst in this regard. They have standard ditties that they pass on from generation to generation rather than creating something new. I just read the Daily Curmudgeon yesterday in the Capital Times, where it says, what we learn from the past is that few people learn from the past. That was from Bernard Shaw. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, thank you. It was really nice. You came in for something that you didn't know what you were coming into, and usually the talks depend on my interfacing with other people. In fact, what happens is I have always fought a desire to take off all my clothes during the talk. And it took... no, it isn't the 60s thing. Yeah. No, it's a matter of one realizes that there is definitely a flow taking place between us. And the examples, especially where things come to life, have to come from you. And in order for there to be a flow or a communication, there has to be a complete honesty. And you have to be what you are and show yourself for what you are. And that sometimes in some ways translates into like nudity, like there's not, I have nothing to hide. What I am, and it's just there. That's it.
The only other experience I've had like this many years ago, Taiwan, and I got off the beaten track. I went to a restaurant. No one spoke English. The menu was only Chinese. And I was embarrassed because I didn't know speak the waiters. So I just ordered one of them from the menu. I didn't know what I was eating, but it was pretty good. There was a lot of it.
Yeah. This is
Jumping in.
50. Yeah, I try to pack as much as I possibly can into each and every talk. Yeah, but most of it, I would say 40% of the talk was cut tonight. Because I wasn't in a consciousness to pull it off. Even in the notes, what happens is when I do the notes, I did the notes for this I did in 2 bursts, and one was sitting for 5 hours straight. I got up once to go to the potty, and otherwise I sat. The first burst was about a 2 to 3 hour burst, and then the second one was a 5 hour straight sit. And what happens is the things. No, you're in such a deep state of concentration, and so many wonderful things are all coming together. Some of which you've been thinking about for years, and then you start focusing on a topic, and what takes place when you're composing the notes never even gets into the notes, and what gets into the notes, a lot of that never makes it into the class, and in this time I never got most of it into the notes because it was too rare, and I can't live all of it yet. And it usually takes about 2 or 3 times going through an idea before I can begin to say it out, and you have to be able to live the principle into existence. I can't do that yet with this. I'm beginning to understand it, so. No, breaks up the vibrations. Breaks up the mood. Thank you. I appreciate that you come dressed so classy-like.